Hey.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Now, we need an introductory song that goes along with the NDFA logo.
Do not look
How
at me. I can't sing to save my life.
My eyes directly went straight to like Joe. What you got for us? What clever thing can you pull out?
No.
So audience, if you come up with ideas, just put them on the chat board.
Make it easy for us, as in we don't have to pay anybody to play them too. That's really awesome. And we're actually
going to easy on your ears too. That way you don't have to hear us sing.
There you go. Shall we start?
Yeah.
Let's get it going.
Okay. Hi, this is Ray, and welcome to Northside Democracy for America. We believe the largest grassroots political organization in Illinois. I want to welcome any people that are watching this podcast for the first time. Please make sure NDFA has your email address by going to our website. I want to give a huge shout out to Hardlands Media, who is helping us out. Hi, Jerome, who's producing the show. And Sophia will be our other host for tonight, asking intelligence questions and keeping us on our feet. Now, we want to recognize everyone else on the steering committee. There's Mary, EJ, Matt, Kevin, Mary, Claire, Joe, Melissa, Sophia, Joe, and me. So normally, you become a voting member by attending 3 meetings and 3 activities for endorsed candidates. However, the meeting part of the equation has been frozen at your status in March. We are giving activity credits to people who do wellness checks, work for endorsed candidates, especially the Senate races in Georgia. I would say Stacey Abrams Group Fair Fight is a good place to start. The next couple of months of NDA podcasts will focus on non-city and other county off-year local elections, especially in Evanston, with the first election scheduled for February 23rd and the general elections April 6th. Evanston mayor will be the only office on the ballot on February 23rd, and if no candidate wins greater than 50% of the vote, the runoff will be on April 6th. So this month's candidates are Dan Biss, candidate for mayor of Evanston, Devon Reed, candidate for 8th Ward Alderperson, Evanston.
We've all been working on that.
Bobby Burns, candidate for 5th Ward Alderperson, Evanston. Tim Thomas, candidate for Oak Park Township trustee. Don't forget about NDFA's tip jar, which will be flashing on the bottom of our screen at certain times, which I cannot predict. And
but mostly when we're talking and not the candidates. That's the important thing. And there it is that people see right now. So if folks wanted to give us a little donation during the meeting, copy and paste that link, and we will accept it with our deepest gratitude.
Yes. Yeah. So let's bring in Tim Thomas.
Bring me out.
Tim. Hi, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, so good evening, and thank you for allowing me to be here.
Absolutely.
Yes, this is a pleasure.
So let's just dive in. Can you talk to us a little bit about your candidacy and then why you're running for trustee?
All right, so I'm kind of excited to be here because I've attended a few NDFA meetings, well, more than a few, but my first time ever speaking, so this is a big deal for me. So my name's Tim Thomas. I live in Oak Park, and I have been in Oak Park since 2011. I'm running with the established party here, the Community Service Party. And so someone was stepping off. They asked me to join their slate. And so that's what it looks like and who I'm running with. This is, I'm just really excited to join the slate of folks who have really been working hard to provide services to the residents of Oak Park. I mean, what we look at when we look at township government, it's that space where people fall through. It's the difference in between what is the local known as the village or the city and the difference between the county and the state. Township government, ironically, is one of the oldest forms of government in our country. And so they are tasked with looking after the indigent, property tax assessment on real property, and then kind of doing road work, which Oak Park is a co-continuous community. So it has the same boundary lines as the village of Oak Park. So our township doesn't take care of those things.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the election dates and the governing rules behind the election dates? As you can tell, Evanston is unique and the city of Chicago is unique.
So yes, so the election date is February 23rd if there's a primary. As of right now, there is not a primary for the Community Service Party. And then the regular election is April 6th. So 2021, of course. So that's what the election dates look like. As I said, I'm running for trustee, so there are 5 people running in this race. 3 of them are on the same slate with me, and then there is at least one other challenger joining the ticket. And it is
Are there 3 openings?
There is 1 opening. Well, all 4 of those races are up. All 4 of those seats are up. That's what I should say. All 4 of them are up. So it's highest vote getters get the seat. This is the first time Oak Park has had a challenged township trustee election since 2005.
That's great.
Wow.
Yes. So it should be a very exciting year for us out here.
Mm-hmm. So what did you learn? Now, you've ran before, have you, for anything?
I ran in 2019 for village trustee of Oak Park. That was an 11-way race, and it was brutal. But I'm glad I did it. Well, it's an honest assessment. You know, I'm glad I got in the race. I'm glad I did it. I came in 5th in that race. So it's about 500 votes away from my closest competitor. And one of the ladies I was running with, who has been a firecracker on the board since she got there, Artie Walker, won. And so I'm so happy to see that she has won and been able to continue to support her in that. But I think, Ray, you asked me, what did I learn? I learned that I did not have enough relationships. And so I think, you know, having done and worked in politics for a number of years, you think you have something and you think you got it, and then the voting public humbles you. And so I appreciate it. I appreciate being humbled and learning that lesson that my connections were not as deep. And I've spent the last couple of years deepening those connections to the community. I now serve on the Township Youth Services Board. Previous to that, I served on the Energy and Environment Commission here. And I'm also now a Village of Oak Park Liquor Control Review Board Commissioner. So I've tried to make sure that I stayed involved and engaged. I'm also working with a group called Black Residents of Oak Park, which is working to get Black folks elected. We've had our own issues out here in Oak Park around race and Islamophobia and many other things. And so it's important that we elect people of color, and then we hold our elected officials responsible for the things they do and say.
Great. So you said the township itself that you're running for is responsibilities for the roads and for the indigent. Are there any other responsibilities, 1? And 2, how do you propose to improve those services and make them more cost efficient?
So when I talked about those are the traditional duties of township government, that they are charged with general fund, taking care of the indigent. They're charged with real property tax assessment. So we have a assessor, Oak Park Township assessor out here, and then they are charged with roads. Because Oak Park Township and Oak Park itself are the same boundary lines, the township doesn't take care of that. The things that they do very well and that they focus on are youth services and intervention services, focus on community mental health, and focus on senior services. So we have a great Meals on Wheels program out here, senior transportation program. We have a really solid program around mental health. And then, the Youth Services and Interventionist Board has been doing great work. We're going to be in a kind of a quandary this year because as I sit on that board, the COVID has changed our tax base, and we used to get $40,000 to help support youth from the Village of Oak Park, and they've pulled their funding, as well as the Village of River Forest has pulled their funding. So it's going to be interesting how the people who sit on the board now figure out the budget and figure out how we keep those services. But you asked me what would I change, and the thing that I would change is that I feel that as a township, as good of the work that we've done, we don't do enough educating the public about what's available and the services that are available. Things as simple as, several years ago, my father visited and we needed a wheelchair to go to the auto show and didn't want to pay $50 to push around the auto show. Didn't know that the township lent, that they will lend you wheelchairs and crutches and the little knee scooters and things like that, that they have all that equipment available and they're willing to lend out to folks. That we have meal programs to help folks who are struggling. There's the general assistance fund that can help folks if they are indigent or they're struggling with rent and all of those other things. And we just, I don't think, do as well as we could in sharing that information. And so I want to change that dynamic, that it is shared much broadly, and that we continue to engage folks and bring people in so that they can participate in the services and get the full value of what's provided.
I don't know if you noticed, but my eyes widened when you shared some of the things that the village is able to, or the township is able to lend out. I had knee surgery several years ago, and I required one of those knee scooters would have been really helpful, but it was incredibly expensive. And so if that could be a relief on people, if people just knew that that was available to them, like, kudos for you for even like getting that out there and pushing that out there, because that is a major expense for people.
It's all those little things. And so that's when I mentioned that the township falls in that place between where village government or state government fails. They take up that slack. So you got to educate people. You got to let them know it's out there so folks can participate and benefit from it.
I would suggest, because I've been involved in Let's Finance, that you maybe write down and put together some intergovernmental agreements with that funding that's been taken away from you, so that you have some checks and balances and they just can't take it away willy-nilly. I don't know if you know or have any additional reasons why or what authority they had to take it away.
It's something that the township goes back to those governmental bodies. They've had these agreements for years and ask for funding. They up it, they lower it, it shifts a little bit. But when you lose a significant amount of funding for youth services, that's a big deal. Kids are struggling. They're stuck at home. They're stuck at home with their parents, and they're doing schooling and all that stuff. And just the opportunity to still engage and to participate in other programs, whether it is online or socially distanced, is a big deal. And the township takes up that slack and offers it for folks who may not be able to afford to go to the Park District or the YMCA or some other program, that the township offers those services and allows those kids to participate.
Yeah, but definitely work on updating and making that IGA. And Sophia might even be able to talk about it a little bit in terms of, getting it so that they just can't take money away. You have a process where they notify you and then you go back to them and you have a hearing and you do those types of things, because that's just not right.
Ray,
it's not a representative government.
Ray, you are absolutely right. But the first thing that has to happen for me is I got to get elected.
Yeah,
and so
I agree.
While I will continue to be an outspoken advocate for that program and many others, I got to win on April 6th in order to have a vote on that board and put that voice to use, and then maybe even use that bully pulpit with these other taxing bodies to ensure that they keep up their end of the bargain so that we can continue to serve our great community.
Great.
Speaking of winning, how do you win? What is the plan, and what do you need from NDFA?
What I would love from NDFA is some of the things that you guys have traditionally done. So obviously door knocking may be a little questionable in the days of COVID, but that telephone works, those text banks work, those postcards work. All of those things help engage folks and invite folks into the community. So I would love to have NDFA support and that level of work. And what it's going to take, I estimate my numbers to be around about 3,796 or so is what I need for my win number. And so we'll see. And that's right now with the 5-person race. So I don't know what it's going to look like, because next week on Monday begins the independent filing. And so what we know to be a 5-way race right now might turn into a 6 or 7-way race. But I got a little experience with that, and I learned something from the last time. So I think I'm in a good place. Lots of virtual house parties.
That's great to hear, Tim.
Great. I think we're going to do last question here. And what I want to get your, and if Sophia wants another question, go for it. how would you, or what is your stance on combining the township and the village together?
Ray, if you had asked me that in 2019 when I was running for village, I probably would have been more open to that conversation because it was the major question: taxes, taxes, taxes. As I've done more work and I've gotten more engaged in the community, I understand that those services are different and that we are not, I know Evanston combined several years ago, and we are not the same as Evanston, even though we love to compare ourselves to Evanston out here in Oak Park. We are just not the same. And so I don't think it would actually work well for us, and that the community would lose out if we tried to combine services because the things that we value just won't be funded. And I'll just shift back to my prior example of the youth services, which are huge out here. And the village had a commitment that they've supported for, years, and now they've pulled out. And so would that still exist, or would they just demolish the program and reallocate the resources somewhere else to what was a more popular line item at the moment? Would we still be able to do the Meals on Wheels and provide the opportunity for seniors to come out and have the lunches and things? So no, the answer is no. I don't support combining the township and village government at all.
Okay, great. Anything else? I think we need to move on to our next two guests.
Any last thoughts for Tim?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for letting me be on here. Campaign? I appreciate it. Check me out on Facebook, Tim for Trustee. I'm there. All right. Thank you, folks.
Great.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Next up, we have Devon Reed, who's running for 8th Alderperson of Evanston, and Bobby Burns for 5th Ward Alderperson of Evanston. Devon, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. How are you, folks?
Thanks for having us.
Great.
Now, you're running in two separate races, obviously, so you're not running against each other, which is good. How would you want to, each one of you, describe your campaigns starting off and some history behind each one, and then we can all talk together?
Yeah,
maybe Bobby?
Yeah, Bobby. We'll let Bobby go first since it's his first time at the NDFA.
Yep.
So a little bit about myself or the campaign, or what's the first question?
Yeah, a little bit about yourself and the campaign, like about yourself and why you decided to run.
Yeah. For me, I grew up in Evanston, and I always start the story sometimes saying I'm the son of a caseworker. My mother worked in the 5th Ward, the ward that I'm running in now, for 18 years for CETA, which is a social service provider that helps folks out with their basic needs, LIHEAP, rental assistance, weatherizing their home, especially for the seniors. And then during another period, she was on the school board at District 202, which is our high school here in Evanston. And so, that was the environment that I grew up in, getting a little bit of kind of the systems change conversation as she talks to her colleagues on the board at District 202. And then also just getting a sense very early on as I'm growing up what the basic needs are in the community. And in 2009, I followed in her footsteps, and we were dealing with some local conflicts here and in Evanston, and some community violence, and really the whole Chicago area back in 2009 was dealing with youth violence, and it's obviously an ongoing issue. And so I didn't know much about government or organizing, but my mother always told me that I had a voice, and I decided to use it. And so we organized a youth walk, got a good turnout. Politicians came out, youth came out, my buddies and friends came out. That was probably their first march that they had ever went to. It was certainly the first march that I had ever organized. And after that, I just became more and more curious, trying to learn more about the world around me, how government works. Also started to have a different lived experience. I was understanding need early on from my mother. And then as I grew up in Evanston, I just saw the need for myself, friends that were struggling with different issues, and even things that I ran into as a young person, trying to kind of grapple with my own racial identity and trying to understand how to find my way and orient myself in this world. And eventually that kind of led up to me wanting to be a political consultant and try to work with bold leaders and courageous leaders who were willing to, do the work of systemic reform and structural reform. I've had the pleasure to work with Devon Reed, Clerk Reed, who was, one of the youngest elected officials in the city of Evanston's history. We ran a guy named Daniel Epstein from Evanston for Illinois Supreme Court, and he was the only affirmatively anti-racist candidate in that race. And he was talking about ending cash bond and making sure judges explain their sentences and all types of progressive, forward-thinking solutions. And in between that, done a lot of community-specific work in the Fifth Ward, trying to work for the empowerment of the ward and the well-being of my neighbors here. And so this is a good and in some ways an obvious next step for me. And it's an honor to have the opportunity to potentially serve.
Great.
Thank you, Bobby. Devon?
Yeah, well, I'll take it over. So my name is Devon Reed. I am currently the city clerk of Evanston. I was elected 4 years ago at the ripe old age of 24. And it's an honor to be here at NDFA. I've had a long history. I think, thinking about it earlier today, it's been about a decade since 2010 that I've been somewhat involved with NDFA, and that transition to, at one point working for NDFA years ago in a very limited capacity for a short amount of time. I know some Evanstonians who are involved in NDFA, Melissa Lindbergh, Kenneth Martin. In fact, I remember when Ken back in, we got some old school NDFA folks here, when Ken was running around counting votes as a kid for endorsement sessions. And, in part, NDFA and organizations like it are certainly why I'm in the seat that I'm in today, but also why, I'm involved with political change. Because, I believe that change starts from the grassroots. And NDFA is a great representation of grassroots democracy. Back in the days of, even Will Guzzardi, race 1 and 2. So, my, to remind folks a bit, about me and to talk a bit about my record is, in the clerk's office over the last 4 years, we've been able to do quite a bit to change the way Evanston operates and the way residents and citizens have access to records. We've worked on issues of, transparency. So that means my office recently authored a memo over the summer working with Matt Topic from Lovey and Lovey to make all police misconduct and use of force records public. We're in a battle somewhat with the police department to actually bring that, policy to fruition. But, those are the kinds of things that we've led on. We've led on digitizing all of the city's ordinances going back to the 1950s, which means that staff and residents are able to more easily access the records of the city in a text searchable, format. And, also we've worked on elections. We've really worked on increasing nonpartisan voter participation. And what we've seen over the last 4 years is a clerk's office that has been laser focused on increasing turnout, particularly around early voting, and in the last election around mail-in voting. And those efforts have been successful at seeing early voting and mail-in voting respectively increase in Evanston. And then lastly, we've really been involved in research and data. The clerk's office, Evanston, one of the things that we've been in the news for recently is leading on reparations. The first city in the nation to come up with a funded reparations program. It's still in the process of being fleshed out, but we've dedicated a funding source to it, and we're working on the details in the clerk's office. And actually, Bobby Burns is someone who worked with us on this. We led on doing the research, and in fact, we drafted and created and released the first city document that made the case for reparations. And this was with the leadership of Alderman Ruth Simmons, who Bobby's now running to fill her seat. And then lastly, we worked on still to the data and equity point, we in research we made sure that the clerk's office deals with some financial our financial disclosure documents, and so we added a question to that. We made it digital and added a question to that form to ensure that folks, within the city, disclose their ethnicity, so we could get a proper reading of what is the racial makeup of our boards, committees, and commissions in the city, so we can make sure, as a city that talks about equity and says that we believe in equity, we can actually back that up with numbers and ensure that there's over-representation of traditionally marginalized groups on our boards. We've got the data, so the next step is to act on that data. The reason I'm running for alderman is, as Bobby mentioned, it seems like the natural evolution. We've been able to do a lot in the clerk's office, but we have certainly had our challenges. And I believe that what we're seeing this election is almost every seat in Evanston contested. We're having a contested mayoral race. Our current mayor has decided not to run for re-election. We've got Daniel Biss, former Senator Biss, running for mayor against two other challengers and an interesting race there. And, who knows, we may have other primaries and other races that come up in February 23rd. Everything isn't done with there. But what we're seeing is our residents waking up and really wanting to ensure that our city government reflects the values of the people who live here. And so that's one of the things that we're seeing people push for. And so this campaign, we are, working to make sure that we have a voice and a vote on the council. I'm running for 8th Ward Alderman against a 30-year incumbent. And I'm glad to talk more about the vision for the 8th Ward campaign as we get into questions.
Now that you each are changing roles and running for alderman, what are the 3 top issues you believe should be addressed in the next 4 years? We'll start off with Bobby again.
Sure. And citywide or ward or a bit of both?
A bit of both.
Okay. A bit of both. Yeah.
City of Evanston, as far as citywide, it has to come down to how we fund our government. It has to come down to revenue. And, the past few budget cycles, we've had a hard time balancing our budget. And this year we had to increase property taxes. I'll give some of the council members credit who weighed in down the stretch to try to reduce the need to raise property taxes. They were unsuccessful. They got the number down. But ultimately, I think we need to be having a year-around discussion about our budget. We need to think differently about, progressive ways to fund our city. We have to have a different conversation with Northwestern. Whatever advantage they got from being the first organization here in the city of Evanston, they were founded before that the city was founded. Whatever advantage they gained from their tax designation as a not-for-profit, I think they fully benefited from that. And it's time to get them back to the table to negotiate new terms. They have, some of the more valuable property in the community, and the fact that we're missing out on taxes that a for-profit company would pay has really set us back over the years. And there's been some movements to try to change that. There was an advisory referendum at some point years ago that was successful, and but it was advisory. It didn't really force them to change their behavior. And so I think we need to get back to the table with Northwestern and figure out a way to get them involved a bit more. As far as, and that has a significance because what I hear the most in the ward are, certainly people being priced out. You have an African-American community in the 5th Ward, a lot of generational and legacy families that have been kind of slowly being pushed and priced out. And at this point, it's even worse. It's people wouldn't even spend the money here if they had it, because they could buy a home and invest in other communities and get a bigger home and more land elsewhere. And so we have to figure out how to get through a budget year without raising property taxes. And so citywide, that has to be a priority. Here in the ward, we have a lot of quality of life issues. It's not unlike many predominantly Black and brown communities around this nation that was impacted by redlining and inequitable school integration and environmental injustices. We have issues with air quality. There's a few waste transfer. There's a waste transfer station and some other problem areas that we still haven't determined for sure whether or not there's particulates in the air that are causing chronic respiratory issues, but we know there's something going on, and we need to follow up with the EPA and really put some pressure on them to come out and do testing. We have issues with affordability and just not enough data about need and the desire of from the community in terms of if our seniors want to age in place or if they want to downsize and stay in the community. And so we need to start to collect more data that helps us make more thoughtful and smarter decisions about how we invest in affordable housing. And then we have some land use issues. When you look at all the studies that have been done in the Fifth Ward, it talks about we need to improve parking in the ward. We need to improve coordinated redevelopment. We need to revitalize underutilized spaces, and we need to improve ingress and egress. And so because I've followed so closely our local government and I've been so deeply involved in this ward, I look at all of these reports and I kind of have my marching orders. And so my job is to figure out collaboratively with the council, but more importantly with my community, to figure out how we can address each one of those points. And I have some ideas, but we also have a very vibrant and intelligent and capable community that's willing to offer some ideas of their own as well.
Great.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Bobby and I are running, and we're two brothers running in sister wards almost. The 8th Ward and the 5th Ward are very similar in many regards. The 5th Ward has a deep history in the African American community of Evanston, and the 8th Ward has kind of also followed some of that. Had a shared history, and so. My ward in the 8th Ward is only second to the 5th Ward. We have the highest rates of childhood poverty in our city, or the second highest rates. We are among the most ticketed, feed, and fined areas of the city. My community is 80% of our units are rental units. We don't have a large home ownership, or single family home base here in the 8th Ward, which is different than the 5th Ward. And so for me, understanding some of the data around what's going on here in the 8th Ward is I look to issues of social justice. I often tell folks that this campaign is about, making sure that we're building in Evanston for single mothers of two, for Latinx entrepreneurs, for our children who are struggling to close the achievement gap here in our city, for grandparents who understand that we have to leave this planet for the next generation, and for homeowners and renters who are struggling to make ends meet. And those are issues that I deeply understand. I'm someone who has personally survived homelessness, foster care, where I lived with a Latinx family, and, 2 parents in prison. And so, when I talk about, that single mother, these aren't just these are policies that have to back up that rhetoric. And so for that single mother, it means that Evanston, we need to pass a fair work week ordinance. Chicago has taken, strides on it, and we in Evanston like to think of ourselves as leaders in progressivism, but we have not taken the step to make sure that single mother or single father can go to report card pickup and ensure that, that their child is going to do better than they are. It means making sure social justice means making sure we're getting reparations right. We have a framework for a reparations program now, but I think that, and I give credit to the aldermen who are working on it, but, I think we need to continue the work and make sure that we're covering as many folks as possible in our city and making sure that we aren't creating barriers to reparations. And then, one of the big ideas is I think we need universal high-speed internet. 100 years ago, Evanston was one of the first communities, amongst the first communities to electrify and have roads. If you look what we need today, I think internet is at the top of that list for improving our economy and, student
schooling.
Outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next issues, environmental issues. Bobby hit the nail right on the head when he, said that environmental issues are issues of equity as well. When we're talking about the waste transfer station in the 5th Ward, or we're talking about James Park in my ward, where we're spewing nitrous oxide from large garbage trucks and other things. And at James Park, we have carcinogenic materials, chemicals, potentially leaking into our pipes. We need to make sure that we're taking a tough stance on environmental issues, environmental equity, but also the larger environmental issues. And that means we have to be doing things right here at home. Evanston, as I was doing some deep dives on environmental issues here in Evanston, I was once proud to live in a city like Evanston, where I thought we were doing great with environmental issues. You look at our, carbon output by metric tons, and it looks like it's going down. But when you really track the numbers, what you see is that most of our decreases in our carbon output is due to our purchasing of renewable energy credits. I mean, great. We want to support renewable energy, but we have to change behavior here in order to meet the crisis that is impending. And so that means changing zoning requirements to allow for more density responsibly that fits with the neighborhood. That means, encouraging ride sharing and reducing the number of vehicles on the road and having stronger building standards. From a fiscal standpoint, we are having budget problems. Every year that I've been in office, our city has faced a multi-million-dollar budget deficit. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to make sure that we are shifting the burden from our most vulnerable residents to our larger institutions like Northwestern. Evans, North Shore Hospital, like some of these, like some of our large corporations that operate here, Target and Home Depot and those larger corporations. So we have to shift the burden to them and away from our lower income residents. So that means, if we want to find $250,000, we should not be increasing, parking tickets and decreasing the boot eligibility. In order to make nickel and dime residents, we need to be shifting that burden to especially larger institutions like Northwestern, as well as reallocating resources away from our police department. The city of Evanston, like Chicago and like other municipalities, we are spending 36% in our budget that was just adopted this year. 36% of our budget is going to our police department, while 1%, 5%, 10%, respectively, are going to our health department, to our parks and recreation department, and to property standards. That is not the Evanston that I, grew up believing in. That is not the Evanston that I know my neighbors believe in. We need to be funding social services rather than a punitive system like policing.
Great.
I just wanted to quickly, if you wouldn't mind, touch on the climate defunding and voices, because and more so from a structural end of it, what I'm hearing from the environmental community is one of the reasons why it's hard to get traction is that we have an environment board, but currently none of our aldermen sit on the environment board, and so oftentimes the work that they do doesn't necessarily kind of transfer to our council, and they don't necessarily always take ownership of it. Not to say they don't appreciate the service that those members are providing. But I think what I'm hearing from the environmental community is that they would ideally love for the full council to sit on a committee to discuss our climate action goals and how we can fully implement our climate resilience action plan. So I just wanted to add that as something that we're hearing from the community in terms of a way to get new voices in. Devon always wonderfully talks about voices, and that's a good that's where every good racial equity or equity conversation starts, is you look around the room and you say, who's missing from this conversation? Mm-hmm. And what we need to also do is understand that most of the conversations happen at the committee level. And so how can we make sure that our committees are reflective of our diverse community? And that's something that Devon talked about, that we as deputy clerk, and he as city clerk led on, and will continue as alderman, which is, how do we make sure that people that are directly experiencing the harm that we're trying to address have a space on committees and have power within our government? And to give you an example, there's no reason why we should be discussing affordable housing, for example, and somebody that is not housing insecure does not sit on that committee. Somebody that has been kicked out of their home, somebody that has been priced out of Evanston, somebody that hasn't been able to secure housing and is living with a family member in Evanston because they don't have the credit.
Bobby,
we need to get into these committees. Yeah.
These are all wonderful points. I really think you both have made some really significant ideas and suggestions. We have to move on. I just have one
Unfortunately,
idea.
we are out of time.
Yeah, I have one idea. You should ask your budget director when and if you guys get in, ask for a 3-year reconciliation going back each fiscal year of why the budget's changed from year to year on both the resources and the appropriation. Make sure it's down to the programmatic level and down below even that to the object level, so you can see the individual changes and then map that on forward. Because you guys keep saying we don't have enough resources, we have too many of this. Well, you need to understand the changes behind that and what's causing it and who's causing it. So on that quick idea, I think it's time we need to move on. So thank you so much,
so
Sophia.
Before we go quickly, how can folks support you all, like on your campaign?
Yeah, I'll start with that. I know that NDFA has, I hope, still 2 levels of endorsement. There's endorsement and adoption. In the last election, when I ran for clerk, I was an adopted candidate, and so I'm hoping to earn NDFA's support again. And folks can help by certainly by contributing to the campaign. You can find us on Facebook at Read for 8, but also by signing up to volunteer. Also. Read for 8 on both Facebook, Instagram, and our website will be up shortly.
Great. Bobby?
Yeah, just burns45.com, BURNS, and then the number 5.com. We put a lot of time into putting some good information up there, especially about my experience. I'm really proud to have been, for the past 10 years, working directly in the 5th Ward, making an impact. And it's all there, and would love for people to volunteer and donate, and also love suggestions, any ideas you have, like the one, Ray, that you just provided. I'm all ears. So, but thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great.
Bobby and Devon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. As we transition out, I have my cat joining us in time for reminding everybody about virtual tip jar.
That's right. So if you look
we'll go directly to NDFA.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm popping on in part because if you look at the comments at the very top, you will see a link in the comments to our virtual tip jar that replaces the actual tip jar that we used to have back when we were meeting at Chick-fil-A meals, and hopefully we will do so again someday in the near future. In the meantime, many of you know, because it reminds us of Dan Biss, who hosted our virtual fundraiser in August, that we work to do things to help candidates like Devin, help them from endorsing them to actually even doing some training to teach them how to run, to teach their candidates how, and their workers how to run a campaign. And I mention that because in the next few months, NDFA is going to be doing a couple smaller fundraisers building up to our major fundraiser, so that while we can continue to do things like these meetings virtually online, hiring clerical help to and do all of our inputs. We are hoping this year to include creating another NDFA fundraiser or NDFA training, which, again, depending on how things go, could be live, could be virtual, but we're going to be doing that. And we're going to start, and this is called a tease in the business, we're going to start on January 20th. Does the date ring a bell? Because that's the date we finally get a new president. And
our favorite day of the year.
I think it's going to be our favorite day of the year. And we are going to hold kind of a virtual inaugural ball via Zoom. And I'm going to mention it now. We're working out some of the details. It may or may not involve champagne that you can purchase. That would actually help us. We're talking about it. We'll find out. But if you're looking for a way to celebrate that night, we will be able to do it, and you'll be able to help us raise a little money in the process. So please bookmark that date. And with that, you can take me out as I look for more questions, and we can bring Mr. Biss on.
Daniel.
Daniel.
Sophia, how are you guys?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. So we talked a little bit, but maybe you want to talk about the Evanston process for how do you get elected for mayor, since it's unique.
It is unique. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me at all. Like, it's just, I always love being with NDFA, but also it's just really awesome that you guys are taking an interest in Evanston municipal races. So just thanks for engaging in this discussion. The process by which the mayor of Evanston is elected was set by a Evanston-only referendum back in 1992, and is unlike how the other offices are elected. So unlike how, for example, Devon and Bobby are going to be running for the city council, and also unlike other municipalities. The way it works for mayor is if 3 or more candidates run, which is our situation, so we've got 3 of us, then there is a February 23rd primary. So that's happening. We've got a primary in, I think, just under 11 weeks from yesterday. If somebody gets over 50% of the vote in that primary, they're elected mayor. If not, there's a runoff between the top 2 candidates on April 6th. So the bottom line is our election is soon. It's happening not only during a pandemic, but at a different part of the election cycle than Evanstonians are used to voting. And we've got a lot of work to do to get the word out to make sure folks know the election is happening and know how to vote safely.
Great. That helps a lot, because most people are confused by it.
Or never even thought to ask before. Didn't even know enough to be confused yet, but now we can all be confused together.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that this is a conversation Ray and I both had today about the election process, and I'm like, we gotta ask him about that one.
Poor Dan. Okay. Your total budget is about $299 million. Mm-hmm. You have a $12 million general funds deficit. What are some of your ideas to managing to that? And I just have to ask this question about Northwestern, because it's been bugging me ever since they brought it up. Does Northwestern get services that they don't pay for?
Yeah.
You asked like a true Evanstonian, Ray. That you are in the heart of it now. Northwestern,
one piece at a time.
Yeah. So Northwestern, like every other educational institution in the state, as decreed in the Illinois Constitution, does not pay property tax. So not only public schools that I think obviously shouldn't pay property tax, but nor do private educational institutions, whether, elementary, secondary, college, or what. It's right there in the Illinois Constitution. So they don't pay any property tax, which is of course the primary way that a business or a resident would pay taxes to the city of Evanston. Now there are various other taxes and fees, like for example, there's taxes on events like sporting events at the stadium and so forth. I think if I were a Northwestern public relations person, I would point out how much sales tax and perhaps even property tax is paid by students and employees of Northwestern. But the bottom line is that as an institution, they pay zero property tax, and the other taxes they pay are taxes that any other entity in their shoes would pay. And they, of course, receive services. So they, of course, receive fire services. There's a tremendous controversy happening right now around policing because there's a Northwestern University Police Department, which is, fiscally for the city of Evanston very helpful. So the Evanston police don't have to provide all of the public safety services on campus, though of course it leads to other challenges that I'd be happy to talk about. And by and large, Evanston's a town because of Northwestern, because of the public sector entities, and because of a tremendous number of faith institutions that has lots and lots of land off the property tax rolls. And so it's always a source of some tension. And, there are many private universities in the country that make payments in lieu of taxes, or they're called pilots sometimes. And Northwestern, though they give certain gifts, they provide a donation to a special equity fund annually, which is of course very important. And they do other actions to demonstrate good faith. They don't make a big pilot like I don't know, like I think Harvard and MIT do, for example. And it seems to be that because they're covered by the Constitution that's going to protect them from having to pay property tax, there's a very different negotiation that occurs between the city and the university. And obviously they're a tremendously affluent institution in a city that's struggling, and I think it's really important for us to be open-minded about how to restructure those conversations to make sure that we land in a place that's beneficial to everybody, including the city of Evanston. And they're not going anywhere, and we're not going anywhere. Right? It's not one of the situations where they're going to say, you know what, if you guys impose a certain fee on us, we're going to pick up and move to Kenilworth. Right? That's not what's going to happen. We're stuck with each other. And it is definitely in everyone's best interest if we can make sure that relationship works to everyone's best interest, and we don't have this kind of tensions and animosities and so forth. So that's the answer to the second half of your question. As for the budget challenge, it's very difficult, and obviously the both of your previous speakers talked about how council just passed a budget which had plenty that anybody I think would find wrong with it. That included a property tax increase during a pandemic when tons of people are out of work. That's in the first place a relatively high and regressive tax that does clearly does not invest adequately in social services, and certainly in mental health and in other key services that are more acutely needed now during a pandemic. It's just clear that we're not in a great situation, and the standard options on the table are not good options. And there's no question that municipalities are constrained. It's not as easy for municipalities to find revenue in a fair way as it is even for the state, which itself is very constrained. But we've got to do two things. First of all, we've got to be creative about understanding there is tremendous wealth in our community, right? Tremendous wealth, tremendous resources, tremendous affluence. We have to figure out fairer ways to raise revenue to fund the needed operations of city government. And secondly, we have to partner in a really aggressive and strategic way with state and federal government. And I do think that, I feel really fortunate in the event that I'm elected mayor to have this background in state government, to have deep relationships with state and federal legislators, and to be able to make sure that we're working hand in glove, because at the end of the day, the real fix for the challenges that not only Evanston, but other municipalities and the state of Illinois are going through comes from the federal government, that doesn't have to balance its budget, that controls our currency. That's really going to be a needed part of the solution. I should say there's some folks in the chat who are prompting me to kind of pick at a very, very sore scab and point out that we'd be way, and I'm sorry for the understatement, but I don't want to spend the next 15 minutes saying way a bunch more times. We'd be way better off if we pass the fair tax. If we pass the fair tax referendum, the state of Illinois would be better off fiscally. Our tax situation would be better off from a fairness standpoint. And that would have been a step toward bringing down the property tax burden that's so difficult for families, and especially working families, to bear. But here we are in December, and that didn't pass, so we have to just move forward and find other solutions.
Well, definitely income taxes are going up for everybody now, at least 1%, just to bring the state close to be able to be fiscally responsible. And even that, there needs to be another 0.5% or more to pay off all the debts and everything else. So it's just, and I think your background as running for governor and everything else is invaluable to working with the state and hopefully bringing in additional resources or different types of agreements that will be a win-win for both the sides. And even with the city of Chicago, I mean, we are all in this together. Absolutely. So, yeah.
And a lot of the issues that municipalities deal with don't really know much about city boundaries, right? Public safety questions know almost nothing about city boundaries. Environmental questions know almost nothing about city boundaries. And so, we've got to work together. We have to.
Agreed. Something that struck me heavily is a few things that Bobby and Devon mentioned regarding the Black and Brown neighborhoods and the inequalities around there. I mean, it was everything from being some of the areas that are receiving the most tickets, booths, and then just the quality of life all around. You're running for mayor. How do you plan on addressing those concerns?
The regressive taxes.
Well, but I think Sophia's right, though, that we shouldn't pretend that these are only economic justice questions. There's a profound history and reality today of white supremacist institutions across our country and in Evanston. And the history of racism in Evanston is deep and profound and exists across our institutions, right? Partnerships between city government and financial institutions to redline, to crowd, I would say residents of color, but at the time it was primarily African-American residents, into less desirable neighborhoods, and then drive up the prices in those neighborhoods as well, to enforce segregation in various ways. You heard about some of the issues of environmental injustice regarding just basics around safety and air quality, but it's also true around education, where today, Bobby didn't mention this, but today there are 9 wards in the city of Evanston. The 5th ward, which is the most concentrated African-American population of the 9 wards, is the only ward that does not have an elementary school in it, right? So you talk about kind of a fundamental, obvious, glaring inequity. And so you had these policies that were not just, it wasn't just, oh, wow, people are racist and so bad outcomes occur. It was policies that were promulgated deliberately by government to keep the city segregated and to keep 2 different levels of services across the board, one for white folks in white neighborhoods and one for Black folks in Black neighborhoods. And so we have a lot of work to do. I think Evanston should be really proud that we are really leading the country in enacting a reparations program. There's going to be a city council meeting this coming Monday night where they may actually approve the beginning of the actual execution of that program. And the bottom line is there's a lot of work left to be done to make sure we do it properly and well, but it's already really important and I think trailblazing idea. Now, the idea at its core is to take money that's come in from the cannabis tax and put it into a reparations fund, and then use that to give essentially grants to defray housing costs for people who are kind of provably descendants of folks who were explicitly victims of these racist policies. And the idea there is really simple and really concrete, and in my opinion, really compelling, which is that you had fundamental wealth inequalities that were created by these policies. The city took away the opportunity to build wealth from Black families, just removed it from them. And so now we're going to make a very, very small repayment toward that debt. to enable some of these families to begin to rebuild that stolen wealth. But what I would say is the city of Evanston and the war on drugs were guilty of advancing white supremacy, but we weren't the only institutions that were. And I think we need to move forward and make sure that other institutions that have played a role in white supremacy need to also step up to the plate and do their part to fund a reparations program to begin to reverse those inequities. So that's one piece of the solution, but there's a good deal more to be said. We have housing segregation today that is built into our zoning codes, for example. And I think we need to really rethink the way zoning perpetuates segregation and makes housing unaffordable and pushes out middle-class families, and do a significant change of in our zoning code. That's a critical example. I think there's basic things around economic justice that we can do. And you heard Devon talk about some of the things that have been done in the city of Chicago, which absolutely the city of Evanston should do as well. You can look at, for example, some municipalities are finding creative ways to do UBI pilots. There's a lot of different things that we can do, but we have to be very, very, very holistic in our approach, right? And I know you want to move on, so I'll just wrap here. We have to take seriously the slogan of, hey, we're going to assess everything we do through an equity lens. We have to have clarity about our racial equity goals. We have to enumerate them on paper, and then we have to assess everything we do against those goals. And the question you have to ask yourself each time is this thing that we're contemplating doing going to advance our racial equity goals or not? And you can't just ask that question sometimes. You can't just ask that question when you're in front of an audience of people of color. You can't just ask that question when you're working on reparations policy. You have to ask that question across the board.
So you have Evanston, not Evanston, Northwestern on one side, and then poverty level communities on the other. Do you think Evanston should have a board of commissioners that's focused on oversight of anti-poverty programs? And if so, how would we put that together? For instance, maybe Northwestern should be offering additional jobs to these communities and bringing in some type of transfer of knowledge and other programs.
Well, I guess when I hear that question for the first time, the way I think about it is, shouldn't the city council be a board of oversight that's overseeing anti-poverty programs?
Yes.
Because we have some incredible number of different boards and commissions. I forget, it's 30 some different volunteer boards and commissions and task forces with members appointed by the mayor or determined by the authorizing ordinance. And if you were to read that list, guys, every single item on that list almost would really seem important. But because there's so many of these different groups, most of them don't wind up getting the level of attention and focus that they deserve. And the question of anti-poverty work, I think, is a foundational question for our city. I wouldn't say, let's create a special commission over here and have them think about poverty and report back to the rest of us when they've solved it. I would say that needs to be a top priority of the city council, a top priority of the mayor. And if there's some kind of institutional structure you want to put in place to elevate it, that seems fine with me. But I would not want to act as though tackling the poverty question is only for one slice of our government. I think that's something for everybody to work on at all times.
And I appreciate that you recognize that the role too that the alderpersons have within electing alder people that could have a clear sense to oversight this in a correct way. So yeah. I wanted to ask a question about police and how are you approaching police reform within Evanston, and what can we expect? What kind of progress we can expect as mayor?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most exciting opportunities for municipal government right now. So I'm giving a tremendous amount of thought to the question, and here's how I think about it. I think there's a few different components. Number one, I think it's important to acknowledge the historic relationship between white supremacy and American policing, right? It's not a kind of weird coincidence that we have continued involvements of racist violence that the police are involved in. I think this is deeply embedded in the history of policing in America, and so we have to view the purpose of our reforms or changes that we would want to make now as directed specifically at that historical problem that lingers with us today. That's number one. Number two, and forgive me if I'm going to sound kind of simplistic here, but I think it's important to start from first principles. What are the police? The police are the part of city government that when they show up to solve a problem, they're there with a gun. They're there with a badge. They're there with the ability, the power to take away your liberty and put you in a cage. In other words, the police are the portion of municipal government that are authorized to deploy violence to solve problems. The police are also a really big chunk of municipal government. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how much of our effort to solve problems do we want to come with the threat of deploying violence or the ability to deploy violence? How much of the time that you spend solving problems in your own family life do you spend threatening to deploy violence? And the answer is, of course, very, very, very little. And what we do is we call upon police. We ask police to solve a whole bunch of problems that are imperfectly suited to their training, and that we don't actually want someone to bring a violent solution to. These are problems of mental health. These are problems of substance abuse. These are problems of homelessness and poverty, quite frankly. And these are the question of traffic stops, the question of who do you, as a victim of a violent crime that occurred yesterday, want to interact with? Is that someone with a gun or someone without a gun? And so I think what we need to do is to be very, very clear about which problems in our community are best solved by deploying violence, and which problems in our community are best solved by doing something else. And then we need to be just as serious about all the something else's, the mental health services, the substance abuse treatment, the housing services, as we talked about a minute ago, the anti-poverty infrastructure that we need to build in the city. And we need to invest accordingly. And that is a big change. But it's a big change because we've spent now not that far from half a century trying to solve every public safety problem by doubling down more on the amount of force and violence that we empower the state to deploy. That's not making us safer. It's not solving the public safety problem. It's not making us feel safer. It's not making us be safer. And it's resulting in incredible impositions on communities of color and especially young men of color. And so that's the transformation that we have to undergo.
Great. Now, Alderperson Maria Haddon has some great mental health police support reform ideas and programs that she has put out there. How would you work that in with the 146 sworn police officers that Evanston currently employs and bring about that equity change and blah, 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 blah?
Well put. The kind of organizational transformation questions are really difficult, right? There's been a long history of kind of cramming more and more stuff into the police department, right? Like, oh, hey, we want more counselors, so we'll hire some counselors and have them report to the chief of police. And I think that is probably not the best way to go, because it tends to kind of bring more and more people into the police culture that, again, is a culture made unique by the authority that it brings with it, the authority to deploy violence. And so, I think a lot of this needs to be about beefing up other functions, but then creating very, very clear partnerships between the police and other public safety workers. The other thing to say, and this is like, this is the cost of doing business with some sort of annoying wonky guy like me. This is the most boring subject in the whole world, but it really matters. You have to make sure that the people who are routing, the people who are taking calls and routing city workers to the solution are incredibly well trained, right? Because I have to be able to take the call and make a really critical snap decision of, this is a person suffering from mental health difficulty that sounds really alarming over the phone, but is not presenting an immediate threat to themselves or someone else in their home. And therefore, we should send not a traditional police officer, but rather a mental health worker, versus, oh, this is a mental health challenge, and this person is in imminent danger of hurting themselves or someone else in their home, and we have no choice but to send a police officer because that's the only way to keep this person safe. So there are models. I think Oregon, and where the CAHOOTS model occurs, is kind of considered an example that people around the country are after ignoring it for 20 years, are finally starting to study as they should, and there are ways to do that training well, but that question of how you make that snap decision of whose job it is to solve which problem is really critical. And we have defaulted, I don't mean as Evanston, but I mean as a country, we've defaulted to send the dude with a gun when in doubt for so long that rethinking how to do that is a critical challenge for us to overcome.
So do we want to move on to affordable housing really quick to see what programs and ideas you have on that particular topic?
We've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah.
We've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right. I'm going to just try to say a couple quick things. I mean, first of all, affordability is a really critical problem in Evanston. Middle-class families have left. And Evanston's a desirable place that a lot of people want to be and cannot afford. So we have to find creative sources of subsidy by finding our own revenue streams, by partnering with state and federal government and even nonprofits. We have to explore creative models of public ownership even, or land trusts and stuff like that. I keep giving the example of my own house. So I live in a modest sort of townhome. It's, my neighbor's house is in that building right behind me, or in our building, I should say, right behind me. And we could not afford to live in 90% of my own neighborhood. And the reason for that is it is illegal to build this house in 90% of our neighborhood. In 90% of the neighborhood, the zoning says you got to have a single family home with a giant lot and a big yard. And I couldn't afford to live there. And so I think we have to analyze the question of the ways in which the zoning code enhances segregation, puts kind of a wall around affluent communities and makes it harder to build affordable housing in the more affluent neighborhoods, and figure out ways to change that so as to enable more affordability. So it's, I'm glad you've asked the questions you've asked, because I mean, to me, the top priority issues fundamentally are policing, housing, and then probably climate.
Okay. So we move on to, how do we help you with the election? What's your priorities with the election? And, how do we get Dan elected?
Well, thank you.
What's your plan?
It's strange, obviously, running during a pandemic. Can't knock on doors, which is sort of always how I've run for office. Can't have coffees in people's living rooms. I'm sort of staring at this little funny camera on my computer now instead of looking at a room full of people at Chief O'Neill's, and it sort of makes my heart sink a little bit.
Yeah.
So phoning and texting on a volunteer basis are really critical. And if you go to our website, danielbiss.com, and click on the Get Involved tab, you can sign up to volunteer to do phoning and texting, or if you live in Evanston, you could take a yard sign or sign up to be on our supporter list. So those volunteer activities are critical. Obviously, we're direct mail becomes even more important when you can't knock doors. So we're trying to raise funds, which also is, you can do at danielbiss.com. But most of all, I was joking with my campaign manager that he did not know how to read when I first went to NDFA meetings, which I don't know if that should make him feel young or me feel old, but it's, this is an organization that has been around now, practically for a generation in this town. and it has a reputation that precedes it, and it's kind of the gold standard for progressive grassroots organizing. Yes, in the north side of Chicago, but in a broader region, including all of Chicago, including places like Evanston and other suburbs. And so, I'd be honored to have your endorsement, because I think there's a lot of people, not just on the north side of Chicago, but in my hometown of Evanston, who are trying to figure out, who aligns with my values. Let me see what kind of endorsements these candidates have, and they know what it means to have NDFA on your team. So I would always want to go into battle together, and it's the most fun campaigns are when we're working together, and certainly the most successful campaigns are as well.
I think, Sophia?
Yeah, I think that's a wrap now.
That's a wrap. Dan, thank you so much. You've been enlightening and really shed some good perspectives on what Evanston needs from a mayor. So we appreciate this a lot.
Hey, thanks to both of you for having me. Thanks for all your activism. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Hi, Dan.
All right. Oh, sorry. All right, yes. So I just put our tip jar link on one more time for tonight.
I think we earned it this week.
I think so too. And I'm just on to, well, first of all, obviously, everybody
including
talked
Jerome
about Western, which was true. And thank you for Jerome. But again, just to remind everybody, the tip jar, super appreciated. But also, January 20th, put it down for NDFA's virtual inaugural ball episode / online benefit. More details to come as soon as we have them.
January 13th is our next meeting. And we will have other guest speakers in the same venue as Dan and Bobby. And
apparently there are more suburbs in the area than Evanston and Oak Park. I understand. Yeah.
No, that's the only ones. So I think we can bid everybody adieu if we've taken care of all our other businesses.
Happy everything, whatever you celebrate during the next few weeks, y'all.
Yes, happy holidays and stay safe.
Mask
That's
out.
all that counts.
Stay healthy.
Because there's going to be next year, a next holiday after this.
Yeah, stay home, wear masks,
Yep.
keep yourself healthy. Thanks again for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.